So we've just hit 200 attendees, so we will kick off. So welcome everyone to the August Virtual Health Tug. So just a little bit about us as your Health Tug organising committee and team. On behalf of Nicole, myself, Lindsay and Mark, a massive welcome and thank you for joining us today. All of our Twitter handles are listed down there on screen, and we do have a Virtual Health Tug Twitter handle as well. So if you do want to reach out to any of us, keep in touch, ask questions, offer to speak, or promote the Health Tug, please do not hesitate to do so. And if you do want to tweet out today, please use the hashtag Health Tug to get your message heard and connecting with other members of the Tableau healthcare community. So in terms of today's tug, we have a little bit of a last minute agenda change. So the speakers for today's session, I'm delighted that William Grishinet is joining us from Operation Fixler. William's nodding, so I'm thinking I've pronounced that all right. And also, unfortunately, Jonathan has not been able to join us due to personal circumstances, but I'm delighted to say that our very own Lindsay Betzendahl will be, shall I say, stepping into the breach with a well-prepared talk that she's been preparing for months and months. Alternatively, she's going to be enjoying us with some insights at short notice. But as ever, with everything that Lindsay does, I have no doubt it'll be outstanding. So thank you, Lindsay, for stepping into the breach and helping with the content. So just in terms of, before we dive into William's talk, just in terms of some community highlights over the last 3 months since we last met. From a visualization side of it, there may have been the small matter of IronViz actually closed yesterday. So there's a single global feeder this year and the entrance finished yesterday. The topic is health and well-being, so we kind of thought it might be quite relevant to us as a virtual healthcare tug. And as you'll see there, those are actually 3 submissions, one by Lindsay, the amazing mobile experience of a sleep analysis, a very personal experience and story by Mark that is entitled Birthmark, and my creation for the Human Development Index. It was just to say, Tableau Public will be releasing all of the entrants in the next week via a blog on their website. And I think it's fair to say the creations are A, inspirational, and B, they'll really help kind of motivate you for the next 12 months to see what's possible in Tableau. So when they are released by Tableau Public, please do go on, show some love to the authors by favoriting the ones that stand out for you. But do take time to look through all of them, because I think it's fair to say on behalf of all of us, you will probably learn something from pretty much every visualization that you look at from the entrance. And I suspect there will be well in excess of 100. So you won't be short of options to look at. Lindsay, Mark, just to kind of throw it open to you, is there anything kind of reflections, Nicole, that you reflected on in terms of this year's IronViz feeders that you wanted to share with the group?
I would just add, if you're active on either LinkedIn or Twitter, there's already a ton of IronVizes that have been posted, especially over the last 24 to 48 hours. So if you can't even wait that week for the Tableau Public blog to post, if you search for that hashtag of IronViz, there's tons of things that you can already start looking at. And there are a huge range of different topics and different ways that people have kind of attacked this IronViz feeder. And you might even see similar topics, but then very different ways that people have created vizzes and kind of dove into it. So like Simon said, there's a ton out there. There's a ton that you can use for inspiration. I know this is one of the times every year that I learn something new that I then even apply, even if it's in a business setting, which I know can be sometimes a little bit different than how the IronViz get built. There's a ton of really good content out there. So definitely invite everybody who's joined today to really look out there and hopefully learn a little bit.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
promise everyone. Sorry, Lindsay, go.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's just so many amazing visualizations out there. It's fantastic that it's on healthcare. I think it gives us an opportunity to see how people are telling these stories and how people are analyzing the type of data that we use pretty regularly. This could be just, I don't know if it's necessarily accurate, but what I've seen is it just feels like this year, two things have stood out that seem to have been different than prior years. One is I've gotten the sense that there's a really strong analysis to a lot of these visualizations. So while people are very still focused on design, and there's some amazingly designed vizzes out there, even within those, I've felt that the analyses have been much stronger, that people are really digging into this information and creating charts and graphs that are conveying this information in such a meaningful way. So I just think that's been fantastic. And as Mark said, I think there's a lot that can be learned just by looking at them, things you could probably take back to, your work environment.
And yeah, I'll echo that. Sorry, Nicole, go.
I was just going to say, I want to give a shout out to everyone who participated in the Iron Viz. It takes a lot of time and effort. And these are people volunteering their time, doing something that they love and they want to share their story. So I really enjoyed spending time reviewing these once they're available.
And I'd also just use it as an opportunity. If you want to see some of the ways that Tableau's new functionality can be viewed. The great thing about Iron Viz is you get some real insights. So I know there's a couple of people out there that have really used animations in a massively creative way. You've got a couple of outstanding examples of storytelling that aren't through the traditional kind of tabulated view. Actually, they're using click actions to be able to expand the story as you go down. So there are some great examples. And Lindsay, just a shout out for you for the mobile design, because it doesn't get showcased enough. But again, if you want to see what's possible on mobile, just pop onto Lindsay's and just enjoy. Cool. So just last thing on the community, we just want to give a shout out to Tableau Live. So as we transition into the world of virtual conferences, Tableau have really, I think, embraced the challenges and the opportunities that will bring. So Tableau Live Europe happened earlier this quarter, and Tableau Live APAC is planned for Wednesday, the 26th of August. It may be called APAC, but in reality, it's only called APAC because of the time zone. So don't let that put you off if you are in other areas of the world. Being able to register, it's free to attend. And as long as you can brave an early finish or a late start, sorry, I'll do that the other way around. As long as you can brave a late finish or an early start, then you can enjoy the content. So the registration link is there. And keep your eyes out for later in the year when hopefully Tableau announce details of a re-imaged TC that will also be moving virtual. And just in terms of our next meeting, we will be planning on having a Q4 meetup. So if you would like to speak or you have any ideas about interesting topics, please do not hesitate to reach out and contact any one of us. And we'd love to get in touch and support you and give you a platform to showcase your talent and your experiences to the community. But on that note, I will stop speaking and I'll hand over control to William to share the journey of his organisation. William.
Amazing, thank you. Hello everyone. I'm going to start also by stopping the video share. My internet is a little bit jumpy where I am, so then my screen share doesn't work sometimes. So without further ado.
Yeah, we can see.
Perfect. Cool, so hello everyone. Nice to meet all 300 of you. I'll start by saying a really, really big thank you to the whole Health Tug team for just inviting me and giving me a chance to talk about Operation Fistula. It's yeah, really quite exciting for me. So thanks to you all guys. So title of my presentation today is The Devil in the Details. The Devil is in the Details, the power of engaging with granular data. So I'll start by just saying, well, nice to meet you all. Big round of applause for everyone. I work for a really small health NGO on a pretty obscure cause, and it's always just an amazing opportunity when any of us get to talk about it and kind of share our experience. And I always find it amazing that so many people take the time to, listen to what other people have to say. So just big round of applause to everyone for attending. I'll also take this chance to present myself. So my name is William Guichenet. So you were not that far, Simon. I'm the analytics manager at Operation Fistula. I've been working there for about 6 months. And I have a background so I'm a development economist by training, but I've always been passionate about data, and sort of my sort of dream is to really be able to work at the intersection of social impact and data. And I feel so blessed that that's what I get to do every day as the analytics manager of Operation Fistula. So let's do this presentation. So I'm going to start by giving you some context. This presentation is kind of built as a funnel. So I'm going to start by really contextualizing. So what is obstetric fistula? So explaining what the disease and the condition is, and kind of where it stands, let's say, within the healthcare space. I'm then going to go and talk about how we go about finding and treating women who are affected by this condition. I'll then talk about what are the different kind of challenges that we face in running our operations, focusing on our one key program in Madagascar. And then as I do this, I'll kind of really get into the data and show you how we use data, analytics, and Tableau to help us alleviate some of these challenges. And obviously, if you have any questions, just please feel free to put them in a chat, and super happy to address them later on as we go. So what is obstetric fistula? So we often say that it's the worst thing you've never heard of. The truth of it is that even when I applied for this job, I didn't know what obstetric fistula is. The main reason for this is that it's a condition that we really don't find at all in richer countries. It's really a condition that happens to women in countries where health systems fail women. But also it's kind of an invisible disease for reasons that will become clear very soon. And so there's very little data about it. There's very little awareness about it. And even often women who have obstetric fistula do not even realize that they actually have a medical condition. So it really is the worst thing that, well, most of us have never heard of. So going a little bit into the details about what it actually is. So obstetric means that it relates to childbirth, and fistula means that it's a natural connection. So to explain what it is, I think it's better if I explain it to you as a sort of little story. So imagine a very young girl who's maybe 13, 14 in a, let's say, pretty poor country, perhaps in sub-Saharan Africa. And she falls pregnant, and 9 months later, she goes into labor. She probably goes into labor, maybe behind her house in a field, or maybe with a traditional birth attendant in her village who's not medically trained. And because she is so young and her body's not very developed, she is physically incapable of delivering her baby. So she ends up being in labor for very long time, hours, sometimes days. We see some women being in labor for 3-4 days. And what will often or almost always happen is the baby will die, which is already one of the first traumas. But as essentially what happens is, because the lady is in labor for so long, the head of the baby puts a lot of pressure on the skin between essentially the birth canal and the bladder or the rectum. And because of this pressure, the skin, the blood cannot flow through the skin, and the skin essentially dies, and a hole forms. And this hole is what we call the fistula. And because of where it is, essentially all the different canals are linked to one another, and the woman loses her ability to be continent. So what you're seeing in this picture is essentially the result of this, which is that women uncontrollably leak urine and feces all the time. And I think what's even more horrible is that the story that I've just told you of this young girl, it's very, very probable that it happened maybe in 2000 or 2010, and that this woman is now maybe 24, 25, 30, 40, and she's been leaking for decades, and she never really had access to treatment. Maybe because she didn't know that she actually had a condition. Maybe she thought she was cursed, and that's why her baby died. Maybe, she lived in a really remote place, doesn't really know about modern medical techniques. or maybe she actually has 4 other kids and she's isolated because, well, she's leaking urine all day, her family abandoned her. And so even though there might be a hospital where she can get treatment, she has no one to look after her kids while she would go to get, that operation. And so she doesn't do it. But despite this very, very, well, traumatic, let's say, introduction, there is hope. There is hope in the sense that a very long time ago, so I believe in 1850 or 1890, a surgeon discovered a surgery with a 90% success rates that essentially allows surgeons to sew up the skin and essentially make the fistula disappear. So it's a very successful surgery. It's not a very complicated surgery. It takes a few hours. It requires a surgeon to be trained on it, but it's not the most complicated thing in the world in medical terms. And so there is a treatment that is cheap, and that is readily available in any country where there are surgeons that can do it. And no matter how weak the health system is, there are always surgeons that you can work with. And so the man that you're looking at right now, this is Dr. Fidel. So he's a fistula surgeon, or a surgeon, and on top of that, a fistula surgeon who's been working on fistula for the past 3 decades. And so in the first 30 years of him working on fistula, he was able to treat 63 women. And the reason the number is so low is that there aren't that many surgeons in Madagascar. This is not very high up on the priority list of the ministry. And so he's extremely busy. He has so many things to do, and he doesn't have either the time or, more importantly, the funds and the resources to be able to help more fistula women. And so we started working with him a few years ago. And the sort of core idea behind how Operation Fistula supports sort of fistula surgeons is by providing them with essentially unconditional cash transfers for surgeries. And so with the funding that we provided with Fidel, in the first year of working with us, he was able to help 75 women, or treat 75, which means that with the appropriate support, he was able to treat more women in that 1 year than he could in the past 30 years, which is quite amazing. And so the way in which we do these conditional cash transfer programs, or that we know how many surgeries have been performed, is using the little device that you see Dr. Fidel holding on the right, which is an Android tablet with an app called ComCare installed on it. And so ComCare is a pretty standard Android app used in the health sector that allows you to essentially collect forms about patients so that you can gather health data about them. And so every time Dr. Fidel does a surgery, he inputs a form about that patient on ComCare, and then our London team will receive this, process it, and then we'll issue payments to him. And with these payments, he's able to purchase the medical equipment that he needs. He's able to support the hospital in hiring more staff, getting more equipment, and it just generates a sort of positive cycle that strengthens the healthcare system and also allows women to receive this really simple surgery that just isn't really on the sort of table of the Ministry of Health, essentially, something that they don't really think of or consider that much. So how does this all actually work in practice? How does Operation Fistula really do this? So I'm going to focus on our flagship program, which is called the FREE program, which means Freedom for Fistula, Freedom from Fistula for Every Woman Everywhere, which is a massive, pretty cutting edge program in the fistula space that we've started implementing in Madagascar this year, thanks to a generous grant from the Canadian government. And our objective is essentially to clear 50 communes of obstetric fistula. And so this is quite innovative in its approach, in the sense that generally the way that fistula is treated is through what we call camps. So camps will be, for example, a team of surgeons, maybe from the UK, from the NHS, who are fistula trained, will travel to a country that has a high degree or a high level of obstetric fistula prevalence. And they will set up in a sort of a large village, and they will just tell people, hey, for the next 3 days, we're here and we offer free fistula surgeries. So they do this and they hope that as many women come, and maybe they treat a few hundred, or that would be amazing, maybe a few dozen, and then they head back home. And so that's absolutely amazing that surgeons take the time to do this. But the only problem is that it doesn't really give us any idea of how much are we actually tackling the problem. If you're treating a dozen cases, but there's actually 10,000 women there who have obstetric fistula, then it's really just a drop in the bucket and a bit of a Band-Aid solution. So what we've decided to try and do is, rather than do these camps, is to really try and think of clearing an entire geographical space of fistula, which means finding every woman, in a way, the backlog of cases that exist there today, and then also creating a sort of system that will allow us, once our team leaves that area, will allow women who have obstetric fistula to be, to know that treatment is available, to have that awareness, to be connected to people who can bring them to the hospitals, and to be able to reach the surgeons who can treat them. So that's kind of the big idea. So the pictures you're seeing there are pictures of some of our patients, some of our team. So in terms of organizational structure, we have a sort of core team in London of 5-6 people who handle fundraising, analytics, and just support the Madagascar team. And the Madagascar team is really the heart of the organization. It's roughly 70 people and a mix of medical personnel, technical staff who will go to the field, find patients, administrative staff, logistics experts, etc. And so here you can see pictures of some of our team doing outreach in villages, some of our patients arriving at hospitals, our leadership team in Madagascar, and also a crazy Zoom call, which I'm sure many of you have been part of as we all work from home during the pandemic. But this, I think, kind of is pretty high up on the scale of craziness of Zoom calls. So how does the program work in practice? So it's split into 2 parts. And the first one is what we like to call outreach. So outreach is us going out to the 50 communes and trying to find patients. And so the outreach is split into different steps. So we'll do a community meeting. So a community will be, a big town, thousands of people live there, and we'll meet with all the leaders. We'll tell them about the program. We'll also get all the necessary authorizations and in a way, just the approval to be able to work in a village, to make ourselves known. I think as a healthcare organization, you have a responsibility to really respect all the people that you work with. And we work really hard to try and really explain to people what we're doing and to bring them into the process so that it's as effective as possible. So we'll do these community meetings. And on the right, I've written sort of give you an idea of the scale of the program, the number of these, let's say, events that will be happening or that we plan on happening. So we'll do one community for each of the 50 communes. So that's 50 overall. We'll then do Fokatani meetings. So Fokatanis are sort of sub-communes. They're smaller villages within a commune. And there we'll meet with those leaders. So here we might end up doing a low estimate would be 500 by the end of the entire program. After that, we'll break into smaller groups with local leaders, which might be traditional birth attendants, local health workers, it might be religious leaders, and we'll do focus groups to try and teach people about obstetric fistula, a disease that has a huge amount of stigma around it. As I said in the beginning, it has to do with childbirth, something that's quite sacred in all cultures. So when a woman fails to deliver a baby, often she's considered, unfit as a woman within her social structure. So we do a lot of work to break that down, make people aware that it's actually a medical condition. And we'll do sensitization meetings to tell people about the availability of treatment. And finally, we'll do what we call home visits, where we literally go to each house, knock on doors, and ask people, are there patients here? And also we tell them, we're here, we're treating this disease, and we teach them about the disease. This is a huge amount of activity. Home visits, we've done thousands already, and we will be doing thousands and thousands more. It's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of people. We have around 50 staff doing this. And so you can already start thinking, there's a lot of data that we're going to be collecting about this to measure whether it's effective and also just operationally whether it's happening smoothly. And after we do the outreach, we get to what we call the patient journey. So outreach is about finding the patient. Patient journey is we found a patient. How do we get her treated? And so this is a multi-step process, which I'll go over here relatively quickly so I can start jumping into more the data stuff. But so essentially, we'll find a woman, so in a village, probably in quite a remote part of the country. Sometimes women will hear about the program and sort of self-register and come to us, but often we'll hear that there is a patient somewhere and we'll go and find her. So we started by registering her. We register her in, as I said, this application called ComCare, and we build a record. So she's now in our database as a potential patient, and she starts the journey. After we've registered her, we perform what we call a water test. So a water test is as simple as you make a woman drink a lot of water, and if she leaks a lot, then she probably has an obstetric fistula. So we'll perform the water test either in her home, if she doesn't feel comfortable doing it, in front of people in a hospital, or we'll do it in sort of a little health facility. So now we have a woman registered. We know she probably has a fistula, or almost sure she has a fistula. And we then transport her to what we call a Hope Center. So a Hope Center is a facility that is, it's essentially a house that was bought by and is run by Operation Fistula. And it is the sort of staging center where the women will remain while they are actually receiving the entire treatment process. So because the health center in Madagascar, or the health system in Madagascar, is pretty weak, when you go to the hospital, it's not like going to the hospital or in the UK or in the US. You have to go with, someone must come with you. They're the people who are going to be preparing your food, cleaning your sheets, just kind of taking care of you while you're there. And the just general conditions of the hospital are not always great, which means that the risk of getting a secondary infection are pretty high. So since we really believe in treating our patients, as essentially the whole idea is to give them the best treatment possible, we've sort of built our own little center where the woman will be housed while she goes through the process. So she arrives at the Hope Center. A lot of our social workers are there working with the women. For many of them, it will be the first time they meet other women with obstetric fistula. It's a very important part of the whole process of care. So after she's there, the medical process starts. So here there's a number of steps. First, we'll get her medical history, collect some data about her, figure out who she is. When did she get her fistula? If she has any other diseases, conditions, anything the surgeon will need to perform, to prepare himself for the surgery, but also a very interesting medical data for us. We'll then do a physical exam, make sure this is where we finally confirm that there is a fistula or not, and also make sure that the woman is ready for the surgery. And then we perform the surgery itself, and the surgeon will fill out a post-op form, also detailing what was the result. After that, she'll stay at the Hope Center for a bit, she'll recover, and then she'll finally be discharged and return home. And after a few months, we perform a follow-up, so very key in the process, where we essentially ask her more sort of questions about, obviously, how is her fistula surgery today? Some of them fail. Sometimes, the way they stitch it, especially if a woman had a fistula for 20, 30 years, the skin is just not strong enough to be able to, it doesn't heal well, so the fistula opens again. So this is where we do that medical follow-up, but we also do the social follow-up. We ask her, have you been reintegrated into society? Are you able to have a job now? Did your family take you back in? Things like that. So this is sort of the core of it. This is really what matters the most to us, because each of our patients is really the core of the mission, and anytime any of these steps go wrong, it's a huge failure for us, and that's what we really work towards limiting as much as possible. Okay, so with that, with the context kind of set, I'm now going to start going into the data. So how does analytics fit into all this? So before I really go into the challenges, I'm sort of going to map out what these different steps look like in sort of our analytics system or in our backend. So the reason I showed you this, this whole organization as little cards is that essentially each of these little cards is one of our ComCare forms. So how does this work? So each of our different users, regardless of where they are in the process, whether they're the technical staff going out in the field, finding the patients, whether they're the nurses doing some of the work, whether they're the social workers doing the social work, or the surgeons, they all have this ComCare app installed on their Android devices. And it essentially looks like this. So this is a web app version. This is for our free app. And here, so whenever they do any of these steps, so the patient or with any of the outreach steps, they will go to this app and they will fill out different forms. So, I hope this loads. But so the outreach, each of the outreach steps will have its own form. So whenever our staff is on the field, they're doing a community meeting, they will find, they'll say at this community meeting, there were these people, there was this number of people, it was in this place. And then for the patient journey side, they'll say, okay, I registered this patient, this is her age, it's where she's from. And then when she gets to the next step of the process, someone will open the app, and they will find that patient again, and they will fill out a new form for her. So this is really the core data entry, data collection point for us. So here, this is like kind of a demo thing, but here, for example, if a new patient were to arrive, someone would just say register new patient. And, unfortunately, it's not letting me show it to you. But essentially, you could just register a new patient, fill out a form, and then she would appear in our systems. So this is kind of the core. This is going on all the time at all the different steps all over the country. People are filling out forms. And whenever a connection to the internet is established, all these forms that are on their devices get uploaded to the ComCare servers. So ComCare, the sort of provider of this application. So all the time, people in the field are collecting data. It's going up to the ComCare server. And then we get to essentially my world. So what I do as within sort of the analytics part of the organization. So we use Alteryx as sort of the tool to do all our ETL. And we use that as a first step to extract that data from ComCare and put it in our database, which is Exasol, so that we can then process it and use it to do analytical things. So without getting too nitty-picky into detail, essentially, like just for those who are interested, we'll use a ComCare API. So we have a little macro for this. We'll extract all the data one by one, and then each of these little output tools is a table for each of the forms. So you'll see here we've got free A, that's the registration form, the water test form, the Hope Center form, et cetera, et cetera. So we got a little API, we pull the ComCare data, and then we write it to Exasol. So this is our Exasol database. Exasol is our database partner. And you'll see that each of our forms then has its own little table here, which then makes it very, very easy for me to pop this data into Tableau or do additional processing so that I can build analytical tools on top of the data. And obviously, we also have an Alteryx server, which is provided by Path, amazing guys. And we schedule all these workflows. So we have workflows doing all sorts of stuff, extracting data from ComCare, processing the data, building data sources, all sorts of things. And all these things are scheduled on our Alteryx server. So it all happens automatically in the background to limit the amount of time we spend doing all these manual basic tasks. So the data gets into Exasol, and that's where I would say the fun begins for me. This is where I start taking all that raw data and sort of putting it into all our downstream tools. So all the tools that we use to really make the operation run and extract insight out of our medical data. So a key one, obviously, we use a lot is Tableau. We're Tableau Online users. So if I just show you up here, so this is for free, some of the dashboards that we use, and everybody in the organization has access to it. The Madagascar team uses it on a daily basis to track how the program is going or do all sorts of things. But then we also use other tools as well. So I would say Slack is almost the most important productivity tool. That's, I'll do ad hoc analyses. I'll put them in there. We integrate Slack with Zapier and Tableau. So some of our dashboards, there's a subscription through Zapier where it appears every day, in the Slack channel. So then we can all immediately start commenting about it, taking actions. And then obviously good old Excel, even though I'm like every good analytics manager on a mission to limit how much we use Excel day to day. But so this is kind of the core sort of analytical structure. It's people fill out forms in ComCare. It gets uploaded to ComCare whenever they're connected to the internet, using Alteryx to pump that data in a cleaner format into Exasol, and then build all sorts of analytical applications on top. And obviously feed that back to our staff so that everybody has the tools they need to be able to make decisions to do their job better on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so now that I've set the scene, we're now going down the funnel and we're going to start thinking, so what are the different challenges that we're facing here and what tools do I use to address them? And so I've split this into two parts again, which is our outreach challenges and our patient journey challenges. So with our outreach, I think these pictures speak for themselves, but essentially it's a big and rough world out there. And what I mean by this, so here two important words are big and rough. And here on this picture, you can really see the rough part. It's incredibly difficult to move around Madagascar. It's a very mountainous country. It has all sorts of different environments. It's also a tropical, so that means that there's lots of monsoon rain at times that can utterly destroy roads. Some of the communes where we go are only accessible by little rafts. So we have to load our motorbikes on there with our staff so that they can drive to these little islands where obviously the roads then will be really bad. So essentially it's so complicated to travel around that we have to use data to try and make ourselves as surgical as possible so that we don't waste our resources and don't let the environment sort of swallow all our resources up. So here I'm going to show you sort of two different dashboards that we do this. So the first one I will say for the almost the big part. So Madagascar is the second biggest island in the world. So it's a really, really huge place. And the 50 communes I told you about, that is a whole lot of terrain. So we actually have a dedicated Malagasy mapping expert who is an amazing GIS user. And he has been just going through all the best geospatial maps of Madagascar we could find to actually map out each individual village in each of the communes where we want to go, and also sort of grouping in a way, so using what we call Voronoi, grouping these the different areas of a commune in different areas that allow us then to do much better planning with our field teams when we decide how are we going to tackle each commune. So here we're looking at a particular big commune. It's called Ifanadina. And so the mapping expert will build these maps, send me shape files, and then I'll visualize them in Tableau. And then it's easy for us to layer on other data on top of here. So we can then figure out, okay, we know based on our data, there's probably a lot of fistula patients here. So then we can kind of start visualizing this data in choropleth maps and see it in a very interesting way. And so here I'm just going to show you really the raw geographic data. And you can see, so yeah, there's just loads of different, this one commune is particularly challenging because it's huge. But so here, each of the little dots you see tell you whether, so these lighter grays are little hamlets. So those will be little villages, and the darker gray ones will be main villages. And we use these maps. So before we go to a commune, we will sit down with the field team responsible for it, and we will go through these maps, analyze them, and we'll literally really go deep into the details and sort of, plan out, okay, we're going to go through this road. Here, there's no bridge. Here, we need to take a ship to make it easier for us to manage all that activity, essentially. And I always find it so cool how you can just, so if I remove the top layer, but if I zoom into just anywhere, we can just really see all the different little villages and areas. And without this, I mean, it would be extremely difficult for us to know, as I said, talking about this idea of clearing a whole geographical space, very hard for us to be able to know exactly where our teams need to go. So mapping and having mapping experts, very key in allowing us to do our mission to the fullest. And so if I show you another way in which we do, another tool we use to help us with our outreach is I have it down here, our outreach tracker. And so, as I said, each of the different outreach steps will have its own forms, and we will then use these trackers to allow us to know, what work has been done. Is our staff doing the work? How many meetings have we done? Have we gone to all the communes we want to do? And by cross-referencing all the data we have, we can see how effective the outreach program is, and also how effective, and also in a way monitor the work of our staff to make sure that everybody's doing what they're meant to be doing. Also, a lot of these dashboards, the data is quite odd. I filtered weird things. The dates are strange. I've anonymized as much as possible. So don't pay too much attention to the numbers. It's really just to give you a look and feel of what our tools look like. But so every single form will have its sort of simple little dashboards. So that at a glance, as we're running the program, we know what's going on and are we on schedule, or are we going everywhere we need to go, and really how effective is the outreach program. And I always love looking at the home visits because these are really, really granular. And once again, because as people fill out ComCare forms, every time they do it collects GPS information about them, you can then go and actually see, what homes did they actually go and visit, and and what, and if you put sort of the date diff on there between when it was filled and today's day, just see the evolution of time. You can see really how they progress along the river, how long it took them. And I just find that just quite brilliant, to be honest, the power of Tableau. But so, yeah, outreach is very complicated, very resource intensive. And it's also something we have to get right, because going back somewhere because you realize you missed patients or you didn't do the meeting you were supposed to do is very costly for us. And so that's why we use geospatial mapping to help us plan out these activities as much as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to get to the part that for them, seeing as, this is a health tug, I think is the most interesting for all of us, which is really thinking and really goes to my, the whole idea I had of really engaging with granular data, which is the patient journey. So the patient journey is a delicate process we can't get wrong. Delicate because at the core of it is a probably very young, very scared girl who needs a life-altering surgery, but who has also never been to a hospital, maybe doesn't know that the treatment she's supposed to get is actually a surgery. Maybe she thinks it's a pill, has maybe never left her village, is probably illiterate, and is probably having to travel hundreds of kilometers from her house to go to a hospital. In muddy roads. It's terrifying. So it's a very complicated environment to work in, but it's so, and in a way, every time we tell a woman, if you trust us, you will get this life-changing surgery. It's a promise we make to her to treat her in the best, with the utmost respect, and to give her the best treatment possible. So here I tried to make slides to explain these challenges, but it was so complicated that I thought that I would just try and manage by using these basic forms, and you're just going to have to listen to the different stories I'm going to tell you. So imagine this woman. She is in a really remote village, and one of our technical staff hears that she's there. He goes to register her. So he goes there. He's really in the middle of nowhere. He doesn't have connection to, doesn't have any connectivity. And he's meant to be in the field, let's say, for a month. He's really in this commune. He's really, he's got a whole plan to go and check loads of different Fokatanis and villages. So he registers her. Maybe he performs a water test, fills out the form, and because he's not connected to the internet, we never get the form. He then, he tells this woman, oh, well, we have, a little convoy with other patients that are also going to go to a Hope Center in the next week. So I'm going to put you in contact with them. He calls up our team. They sort out the transportation. She arrives at the Hope Center. She gets there and she tells them what's going on. She's really scared. It's a big journey for her. And so the Hope Center staff are like, okay, don't worry. We're going to get you booked in. I'm just going to register you again. So she registers her again. She starts the process. The surgeon sees her. She goes through this whole process. And in the meantime, our other staff member has gone back to the key village in the region. He's now connected to the internet. His original registration form now gets uploaded. We now have two records for the same woman. So you might think, okay, well, that's pretty obvious. She probably has exactly the same data. We can identify immediately that it's the same person. And I will tell you that in 90% of cases that is wrong, because people make mistakes, because people don't, maybe, in Madagascar, people use nicknames a lot. Maybe she spelled her name differently multiple times. We can't be 100% certain that it's a duplicate record. And when I worked for, in let's say normal, in other topics, if we had records that were just kind of really bad quality, we could say, you know what, let's just filter this one out. It's not worth the time to investigate it fully. When this record might be an actual woman who's expecting a surgery, you don't filter it out ever unless you're 100% certain. So that's one big challenge. How do you filter out a record you think is a duplicate when it's potentially a woman expecting a life-changing surgery? Another issue that can happen, because ComCare is an application, it's an Android application, like all application, it needs updates. So sometimes, we'll make updates to the apps, we'll change forms, we'll realize that a question is not translated in Malagasy correctly. We do all sorts of changes all the time, and we follow a kind of rigorous process for telling our staff in Madagascar, update your apps. But sometimes they're out in the field, for a month, they can't update the application, they keep filling out forms, and then a month later, all these forms get uploaded, except they're on the old version of the app. And then I wake up on Monday and I get 12 workflows 12-year scheduled workflows have broken because of all these issues. So that's a big issue, version control and just data quality in general. When you have 50 field staff in places with low internet connectivity and also who have low levels of data literacy, how do you make sure that they're using the correct version of the tools and that they're using the tools correctly so that we can then have data that we trust at a record level? And then the other one is on more the surgeon side, the medical side. There are not that many, fistula surgeons in Madagascar. We try and work with as many of them as possible. We vet them as much as we can. We train them as much as we can. We partner with other organizations to provide them with training as well. But at the end of the day, these surgeons are people as well. And since our goal is to give these women the best treatment we can, the best treatment possible, we also need to make sure that our surgeons are performing, to the highest standards. So some fistula surgeries are much more complicated than others. And not all surgeons should take all fistula surgeries. As in any other, surgery there is. Sometimes in the UK, if you need to get operated for one condition, maybe a doctor will tell you, go see this other guy, he's much more specialized than I am. So it's our responsibility to track, all the data that's being submitted by the surgeons and make sure that they are providing, that they are operating on women, on patients of their level, and that they have, a high success rate so that these women are being offered the best care possible. So here we're thinking a lot about the surgery and post-op forms, and just really looking at them in really fine detail, and trying to, identify patterns in the data that might make us think that maybe this surgeon is operating patients he shouldn't be operating. So to summarize, so for in the sense of the patient journey, so these big issues, so data quality, is staff using the most up-to-date version of the app? This is one aspect of it. Patient tracking, really the most important. Is this really a duplicate record, or is this actually another woman? How do we check this? And also, where is a woman in the process? There's all these stories I've told you, they happen times 12 every day. That's lots of activity all the time. So making sure we know where every woman is all the time is obviously super key. And then the final, operational medicinal risks, which is just our patients receiving the highest standard of care possible. So here I'm going to go and show you some of the different dashboards that we use to address all these different challenges. So the first one for the data quality, I'm going to show you a very simple dashboard that was requested by our field team in Madagascar. So at first I built them really fancy, complicated dashboards with just super cool charts, and they told me I have no idea what's going on. They told me I can't read this, I don't know where to go. I mean, it looks really cool and all that, but it doesn't load very well on my phone. It doesn't load very well on my computer, and also I just don't know where to go. Like, can you just make it really simple? So what I did is I built this very simple table with a very simple check system that allows our staff at a glance to know if everybody is using the right version of ComCare. So the way this works, so I've anonymized this, so a lot of the data is wrong or gone and also wrong. But the idea is that at a glance, someone can go here, and whenever all the data that's pulled from all the different forms will all feed into this dashboard and essentially tell us, using the metadata of each form, what version of the app was used to submit this form. And after we put this tool in place, within a week, we had everybody using the right version. Whereas before, actually being able to which sounds simple, but really being able to know what version is everybody on, calling them all the time, figuring it out, knowing who had really updated it or not, was an extremely slow process. And now by just engaging with it in a very granular way and building a very granular tool, we can just rely on these little systems of crosses and checks to then be able to call each person and tell them, you need to update now. And this has proven quite paramount in making sure that the data streaming into all our tools is really aligned and cleaned, and and that none of the pipelines ever break. So in terms of patient tracking, here I'm going to show you sort of two tools that we use. And the first one is the one where I'm going to actually stray away from Tableau. The main reason being that when we are dealing with patients and the level of granularity of really tracking them through each step of the process, we have both a set of Tableau dashboards to do it, but we rely more and more on this Airtable. So for those of you who don't know, Airtable is a sort of mix of SQL and Excel. You can kind of work with it like if it's Excel, but it's actually a full-on SQL database, which is great because then all the data that's in here, you can then plug it into other Alteryx workflows. You can extract it and then use it as a Tableau data source. It's a very robust tool that everybody can use at the same time, know that everybody's on the right version. So we really love using this tool. And so essentially, all the data that streams in from our forms using the Airtable API gets pushed onto here. It gets pushed into these extracts that I won't show you because this is real patient data. But we will then manually check them. We will check them to make sure that they are not duplicates, that they are unique records. If they are duplicates, we will find all the different cases that they're connected to. And we will then, oh, no. Sorry, the Zoom thing is in the way. We will put loads of information about them, which will allow our leadership team in Madagascar at a glance to know where each patient is. And that information essentially lives here. So we'll put where they are, we'll put what treatment stage they're at, we'll put what status they're at. And in a way, this is our ultimate sort of patient Bible. In a way, because even getting one record wrong could mean, that's one patient we've lost. It could be that a patient, as I told you, she got to the Hope Center. She thought she was going to get a pill to treat her fistula, but then we told her it was a surgery and it scared the living hell out of her, so she ran away. In our Tableau dashboards, we found it was harder to be able to see that. And so that's why we use this extremely granular table. And we can also, if we realize that something has actually changed, we can manually just change it in here, and then we can plug this data back into other dashboards. So we can kind of really have that level of finesse that you need to be able to really at a glance or really on a really short notice, update all your data and make sure that it's really reflecting the truth, and that you can say at all times, I know where all my patients are, and I can treat them. And I can offer them the best level of treatment, essentially. And once again, I'll say this tool, Airtable, is absolutely amazing. The Airtable API is extremely powerful. And it's really, with Exasol, kind of really, and Tableau, one of our core pillars and allowing us to treat this huge amount of data that we're getting all the time. And another simple tool, so more on the Tableau end, which really helps us in that whole process of tracking the flow of patients all the time, is this what happened last week. So another very, very simple dashboard. This dashboard is one that I built because, once again, we were finding it was eating up loads of our time because we were using this Airtable to track the patients really granularly. We also wanted a sort of automated tool for our team on Monday as we come in to know essentially what happened last week. As simple as that. So this simple dashboard, it's always filtered to the previous week, and it will essentially tell us all the things that happened during the previous week. And this will automatically be posted onto a Slack channel using Zapier. And on Monday, we'll all start a thread on there and we'll be like, oh, wow, all these things happen. On Monday, for example, I wrote everyone, wow, guys, 16 surgeries happened last week. That's really amazing. And then we'll also use this little table to really kind of, to get the detail there straight away. So, we're not just getting the aggregate numbers, but we can just go into this table and we can see, who the patients are and be able to take action quite quickly. So the whole integration from Zapier, Slack, Tableau Online it reduces a lot of the strain on our team in terms of the manual stuff they have to do, and it puts the data, straight away into at our fingertips so that we can then take action and do things and resolve issues. Okay, and the final one I'll show you one here, which has to do with the medical risk, and that's ensuring that our patients are receiving the highest standard of care possible. And here I'm going to show you a tool that we use that was developed specifically with the surgeons in mind. So this is a mobile-friendly dashboard. So it was really designed so they could just on their phones go on here. They all have Tableau online accounts, and they could just immediately see how am I performing. So it's not like we're monitoring them, at a distance and kind of chastising them if they do poorly. We work really closely with them, and we want them to also be able to track their own performance so that we can all talk about it, and take whatever action needs to be taken. So obviously all this data is fake. I really wish we had done 90,000 surgeries this year. That would be absolutely amazing. But essentially it uses Tableau server or Tableau online based user filters so that everybody only gets to see their own data. It tells them how the overall performance of everyone, and then it gives them their performance underneath so that then, they can get a picture of, maybe I'm not doing well as the other guys. Why is that? Maybe I should try and work with this other guy. Maybe he's got things to teach me. And also then they can see, all the list of all the patients that they've treated. So it's also a good tool for them as they're treating more and more and more patients to be able to see, what's going on. And also since there is that conditional cash transfer program, it also allows them to know, it makes us transparent towards them because then they can see, we all see the same data. We all know how much money is meant to be paid out to them every month. And so it just builds a healthy relationship out of it. Again, a completely automated tool that never gets really updated, but that everybody can use according to their needs. So as you can see, we spend quite a lot of time trying to make sure that we have really high quality, reliable, granular data, because to us, that's the way we can make sure that all our patients get the best, level of care possible. But also because we're a very data-driven organization. Obstetric fistula is a very underfunded sort of topic. And in general, in the social impact space, not a lot of, the level of data quality we find is increasing now, but it's generally quite low. And so we feel like by having all this data, we understand that it allows us to really do all sorts of cool analysis and loads of cool community building sort of exercises. And so because we've spent so much time trying to really get this high level granular data, we can then go and do really cool analyses on top of it. So to give you an example, this is our risk score and outcomes. So here again, I've anonymized it, kind of messed around with the data. But essentially, because we collect so much medical data about each of our patients, we're able to do things like compare the risk score associated with their fistula surgery to the actual outcome of the surgery. So essentially, there's a methodology people use where based on a number of factors like your age, your previous surgeries, you can see at the top left. Each of these will give you a score, and that will give you an overall score, or risk score as to the fistula surgery not being successful. And if you're above a certain threshold, which I believe is 25, you're considered high risk, and below that, you're considered low risk. And because we collect so much data about this, we're actually able to build these really cool charts where we can look at, for example, based on the risk score, what was the actual duration? Are we seeing a correlation there? Are we saying, is the risk scoring methodology actually effective? Or are we saying, if people are have a higher risk? Do we see a lower level of success in our surgeries? But also in terms of complications, are we seeing more complications if there's a higher level of risk? And that also goes into us, checking on the performance of the surgeons and making sure that they're all performing super well. We then also build things like this, where we look at pure performance over time. So it's kind of like a desktop version of the little mobile version thing I showed you, where we can just see all our surgeries at a glance over time to make sure that all our surgeons are performing well, and try and understand why are some of the fistula surgeries not going well. Is it a factor of we operated someone who maybe shouldn't have been operated on because she was super high risk and it was dangerous to her? Or is it that, maybe this was too complicated for a certain surgeon? And then also, because this is the health tug, I feel like I have to talk about this. So this is our disability adjusted life years avoided calculator. So DALYs are a very important sort of concept in everything to do with healthcare. And it's essentially a measure of, so disability adjusted life years is essentially a measure of how much does someone's condition impact their quality of life. So each disease or condition will have a disability score associated to it. And believe it or not, fistula has a disability score of, I believe, 0.342, which is as high as being amputated of both legs. So living with a fistula is considered as much of a handicap and as much of a reduction in your quality of life than not having both of your legs. And so with this score, we can then go and calculate each time we do a surgery based on the woman's characteristics, how many disability adjusted life years did we sort of save for her? Did we avoid? So how much did her quality of life actually increase over time based on a, let's say, pretty rigorous approach? And so you can see kind of how we do this calculation. So it's explained down here. So we take the expected years that the woman has, remaining to live times the disability that was avoided, and that gives us a disability adjusted life years. And so, for example, so a woman here who's age 10, so that tells you how young some of her patients actually are. The life expectancy in Madagascar is 68.1. So that's, so she has 58.1 years of life remaining. And she actually had a rectovaginal fistula. So that's one where you're leaking feces, which has an even higher disability score. And so we do this times that disability score, and that tells us that DALY's avoided. So that means that being able to treat that 10-year-old woman with this horrible fistula, she gained essentially 30 years of life, which I think is quite brilliant. And the cool thing was this is that, now being in a very metric kind of world, we can put a sort of, for each dollar spent, how much really benefit did we bring to our patients? And that allows us then to measure our work, and also it makes it easy to talk to donors so that we can, give them a really reliable number and tell them, in the case of fistula, because it has such a high disability score and the treatment is so, in a way, simple, each dollar goes really far in terms of impact. And the final thing I'll show you, which is, since we're in a community kind of, well, this is definitely a community event. We really believe our kind of vision one day is that loads of different fistula organizations are going to use the same methodology we do. So the little diagram I showed you at the beginning of ComCare through Alteryx to Exasol to Tableau, all these packaged tools together, this stack, and the way that we've organized it is something we call GoFar. And this GoFar platform, we can make it available to other partners, particularly the UNFPA. So it's the part of the UN that takes care of everything related to maternal health. And essentially, we build forms for them, and so that they can run their own fistula programs. And then we handle all the data processing, all the analytics aspects, all the developing of dashboards behind it. So we've built this system, and we help other partners in the fistula space by making it available to them. And the idea is, as I said, there's really poor data about fistula, but the more and more people use this rigorous, very granular methodology, the more global data we get about fistula. And so to tell you a little bit about our progress in that, so this is another fully anonymized dashboard, but these are all the different countries around the world that have, where someone at least uses our GoFar platform. So it could be just a surgeon who's also benefiting from our unconditional cash transfer program. It could be a whole UNFPA office. It could be anyone really. So overall, we've got 14 countries. We've built 47 apps. And over time, we hope to kind of really build one really app that, one app to rule them all, so that we really have one kind of best practice standard application with really common data across everyone. But it's just quite amazing that every month we have people filling out, hundreds of forms around the world, all this data streaming in. And obviously, the more data we have from all over the world, the more medical analysis we can do on it, the more we can understand fistula, and the more we can help women around the world. And that's where I think tech is really cool, because once you've set something up, the marginal cost of sharing it across everyone is really, really low. And so we're just really happy to kind of have that lead, let's say, have that expertise, and to be able to share it with other people who, are working on the same mission as us. So a few final thoughts. So really, I think what I hope comes out of this presentation, why I said that the devil is in the details and why my job is really stressful at times, is that when each record is a person waiting for a life-altering surgery, you need to treat it with the utmost respect and diligence. And I think it's really, really difficult at times. Sometimes you're looking at the data, you don't really understand what a record is, but you know that can be a woman who's waiting for a fistula surgery, and most probably is. And so you have to move mountains to be able to, find out what's going on and take the necessary action. So something you might have gone from my presentation is we really believe in small, simple, robust tools for loads of different reasons. I mean, they don't break a lot performance-wise. They load easily, everywhere, even if internet connection is quite bad. And then if you're dealing with people with lower levels of data literacy, they're able to understand it, at a glance. And that's, I think, what drives, that's more important. So we really go for simple and robust, everything working so that everybody has access to the data they need. Another point is, if you don't trust your own data, you and your organization will never truly act upon it. And I've seen this quite a lot. And I have a consulting background, and I've been in loads of different places where people just didn't really believe the data was good. And so when they don't believe the data is good, even though the analysis you know on top might be amazing, nobody really believes in it, and it doesn't really get people to take action on it. So I think that by really starting on the granular, even though it's kind of difficult, even though it's kind of really annoying at times, you build such a solid foundation that then it's really easy to build analytical applications on top, but also build that data culture where people are really taking data-driven decisions because they believe the data. And the final one is dashboards don't take actions, people do. That's when I say often, which is, you should really empower people, train them appropriately, and remember that at the end of the day, it's someone who's going to have to take that action and do something about it. It's not the dashboard. So remember to be people focused and to really focus on that data culture rather than just really, on the tools themselves. So thank you, everyone. I feel like I chatted for a very long time, but appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to the presentation, and happy to take any questions if there's time for them.
William, a lot of comments have come in about how amazing the work is that you're doing, as well as Operation Fistula. I had no idea that was the type of work or presentation we're going to go over today. I'm very humbled. It really is amazing. So kudos to you guys. There are some questions in the Q&A. If you wouldn't mind answering them directly in the Q&A section, because we want to allow a little bit of time for Lindsay to do her presentation.
Yeah, 100%. I'm sorry, I don't know if it was a really long time or not. I feel like I did, but yeah, very happy to answer them directly. No
Great.
worries.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I might be making a donation.
Yeah, that was really great, William.
Well, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Alrighty, let's see if I can do this.
You can see your screen.
Hang on. Let's see, what screen do you see?
Yeah, it's in the presentation mode, so it looks good on my end.
Okay, good. So you see the
Yeah,
presentation.
it's just the slide. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Okay, everyone. Before I get started, as you may have heard if you were on the top of the hour when we had started, I'm kind of pinch hitting, jumping in here. So my disclaimer is I've never given this presentation before and it wasn't totally finished, but hopefully I can kind of wrap this up in a nice package and it'll still seem seamless. So we'll see how that goes. But I am excited to still give this because I think it's important and it's a really great, I think, topic on kind of piggybacking on what William just presented, since he spoke a lot about, you know, the individual stories of the people that they are serving out in Madagascar. So I'm going to present on the ethics of stories and how to humanize data in healthcare. And as you probably heard and know, so I'm Lindsay Betzendahl. I used to be a licensed marriage and family therapist. I just don't have the L in front anymore because I let my license drop when I moved and don't practice anymore. But I am a consultant at Health Data Viz, Tableau Zen Master, and Tableau Public Ambassador. And I'm also a professor at Temple University where I teach a data visualization class. I've been using Tableau for about 7 years, but I spent 10 years prior to that as a behavioral health clinician, which is going to be kind of the founding crux of a bit of this presentation. And I also was the founder of Project Health Viz, a community data visualization project with a goal to tell the stories of our health. So I find that in healthcare, we have this very interesting explosion of data, storytelling, being able to communicate people's stories, and this ethical piece of how to do that in a meaningful and appropriate way. And let me just go back for a second. And in general, I think we've had kind of an epidemic over time in healthcare of terrible storytelling, where it's really important to tell these stories as it relates to data science and health. And healthcare organizations, as you all probably know, working in them, sit on gold mines of data that are really literally the letters and words and paragraphs that make these human stories we attempt to tell in our work. But we're not always that great at it, especially sometimes in organizations when we're tasked with building dashboards of numbers and graphs, and sometimes those individual stories get lost. So clearly, we as humans are the basis for healthcare data. We're the ones that are, you know, going to the doctor's office, having illnesses, paying for medical care, and all those data points are being tracked and calculated and tabulated. And you're likely to work with data stretched across various topics in this field. I have worked on data involving all of these topics, very widely different, but all about people. And so as both a practitioner and a data analyst, I have actually sat next to and helped people during some of their most vulnerable moments. I have been there when I was practicing in the field. Moments in which these people are giving over their health data or becoming data without really their knowledge because they're in the middle of a crisis or an emergency or in need of care, and they're not concerned about the data part. But later, that data is then interpreted by other people and used to make probably important decisions. So obviously, I've been on the other end of receiving that information, reviewing that data on people, and needing to make analyses and decisions upon it. So let's be honest, when you go to the hospital or a doctor, you're likely having a terrible time, and that's why you're there. So you're going to go see a medical professional, and that experience is clearly a story or a journey for you. It has emotions around it, right? Like you have feelings about being in the doctor, as an example, about whatever you're going there for, about how you were cared for, about what you decided to do with your experience. But it's also just information, and information is just data. And so while it's all the same thing, it's a very different thing. The words we use to communicate this data really matters. The perception of the data really matters, and who we are in our perceptions will likely determine how we convey and communicate that data. So when I worked as a clinician, as a behavioral health clinician, I often had to meet my clients in the emergency department. I worked with kids and their families, and often kids would end up in a crisis. They were very traumatized children, suffering from severe behavioral health issues. And so I would rush to the emergency department to be with them, to talk to them and the staff and attempt to help assess the situation, while also providing some very needed context to the medical professionals so that they could understand the youth's story. They had a snapshot in time, and I tried to provide additional data and information to help them guide their decision on what was going to happen to that youth. So I would sit with them for hours in the emergency department at times, conveying that information. So I was able to see firsthand what it was like to be a patient in the emergency department and what challenges they experienced, such as waiting for a long time for an inpatient bed. A couple years later, when I moved into analytics, I ended up on the exact other end of this particular example, this data. I worked at a company, an organization that managed all the Medicaid data for Connecticut when I lived there, and literally would get the results of people who were in the emergency department waiting for a hospital bed. And I remembered having been on that other end of the data with those kids. So I was no longer part of the making, but part of the interpreting. But as a professional in this space, I had a shared knowledge and context about the data. And so I just want to show how this actually played out. So if we go back to my time in the ED, there was a time where there was a surge of news in Connecticut surrounding the increase of youth in crisis waiting in the emergency department. And a lot of data points came out in news articles about how long kids were waiting at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, one of the two very large children's hospitals in the state, the other one being Yale University Hospital. And so all this information was coming out, and so it was very important that we were looking at this information and providing accurate data to our stakeholders and our state clients to ensure that they understood what was contributing to the problem, how do we fix the problem, and how do we address all these news articles. So this is actually a table of some of the data that we had been collecting. This is data on kids that were stuck, which means that they've been waiting for over 8 hours in the emergency department for a hospital bed. And so you'll see, I know it's very small, but there's one particular facility, fourth from the top, that has the majority of all kids who were ever stuck waiting for a long time in the emergency department, and that's Connecticut Children's Medical Center. And so without any context or experience, we may think, well, something's clearly going on at CCMC that they cannot move kids out of ED. We don't know in this context how many kids went to the ED that didn't get stuck, so we don't have that context, but we just see that there's a lot of kids that get stuck there and not so many in other parts of the state. So we may also think perhaps it's something about Hartford, that emergency department happens to be in Hartford. Maybe something about what's going on there and their access, or the kids that are coming to the emergency department. It turns out there are many contributing reasons to why CCMC had large numbers, but because I already had experienced these stories, I knew additional questions to ask. Where were these people coming from? Were they actually all just coming from Hartford and going to their local ED? Or were kids coming from all over the state to CCMC because it was one of the top hospitals in the state? Was CCMC, as I'm kind of saying, the nearest hospital and kind of getting that location? Did youth have better access to inpatient if they went to CCMC versus another hospital? So can we look at inpatient rates? Our kids can they get in the door easier if they go to that ED versus another? And what was the length of stay? Were kids actually staying longer waiting in this ED than others? Or just because they got stuck, were they not waiting any longer and they were actually getting access to care? So the point is that, as well, data is great for spotting the patterns. It does have a tendency to lack that human factor. If we don't ask the right questions, we just create distance between the actual story, the you, the me, the us, the person, right? The context behind all of that. And so in order to obtain that context, we often need to speak with experts. We need to ask questions. We need to look into the granular data and understand what's really going on. I mean, that's key to anything, is to check analyses with both people different from you and perhaps with more information on the topic than you whenever possible. So Chip and Dan Heath, I think have a great quote when they say data are just summaries of thousands of stories. But if you tell a few of those stories to help make the data really meaningful. And so I want to share an example of how just because we are bombarded with millions of data points, probably for many of you working in data analysis in healthcare, we have a ton of information, right? And I experienced a very personal situation working on a personal viz where I was use a data set that had almost 100,000 rows of just location information for Africa, for health facilities. And at first, this 100,000 rows, when you just plot it on a map, as you'll see on the left, felt as though the content was rich with access to care. And so at first blush, I thought, well, there's really nothing in this data. Like, it looks pretty well saturated. Africa looks like they've got a lot of health facilities. Things must be really great. Well, I knew that that probably wasn't the case, just having some inkling on the nature of Africa and being more of a third world country, or continent even. So I had to get a little more information on this, but also because I had some context, I was able to dig in a little deeper. And so I started looking at a particular country, Liberia, which was sort of on accident. And I stumbled upon it and found out that it's approximately 43,000 square miles. Now that's about the size of Louisiana. And for those in the US can get the sense of how big Louisiana is. But I would imagine for most of you, you know how far the nearest hospital is. And I bet you probably have an idea of what's too far. And so for me, if it's 30 minutes away, if it's within 30 minutes, that's probably close enough. If it's beyond that, it's a little too far for me to get to the hospital in a reasonable amount of time if I needed to. So what I found out is Liberia has 38 hospitals. Now remember, it's the same size approximately as Louisiana. Louisiana has 262 hospitals. That's a huge difference. So when I was able to put that into context and into perspective, I knew that there was something here that was different. So even though there was tons of data, location data for healthcare facilities in Africa, by putting it into some kind of context that I could relate to, I understood that in this case, the access to hospitals in Liberia is very low. And the population, I should have added, is about the same to Louisiana as well, about 4.7 million people. So upon further exploration, I discovered that many of these hospitals, as you would expect then, are hundreds of miles away, hundreds of miles apart. And that for even one province, may only have one hospital. So think about like one county and there's only maybe, or one state or one hospital, county, there's only one hospital, which means it's very hard to get into. And they probably don't have a lot of services available. And so care isn't always the best. They're small, they're under-resourced. I actually was able to look up individual hospitals, saw pictures of the buildings. All of this helped provide me additional information about these data points that, again, on first blush seemed inconsequential. There were just a bunch of locations of hospitals. But once I added some more of this story to it and understanding how far things were and thought about the people and how far they might have to drive and thinking about if I were them, then I was able to really find out how important this data was. And so it was really eye-opening. And so for me, that meant don't assume there isn't a story within, hundreds of thousands of rows of data. Each data point is a story, and it's definitely, they're all worth exploring to find out what that story is. So obviously, numbers need stories and stories need numbers. And without the two, there's no context and no connection to the people within them. So it's important to also see ourselves in that information or see others in the data so that we can truly explore, analyze it, and ask the right questions. So in a world with limitless data and we're rapidly trying to catch up and visualize it all, sometimes I know I experience it's, here's some information, quick, we need to visualize this, a client needs it. Here's some understanding of what this is and what they need and the scope of the work, and quick, go, go, go. And so we tend to jump this gap and make this mental leap from here's the data to let's visualize it and make sure we can aggregate it and understand it in a quick and meaningful way that we forget about the consideration or thought with how the data came to be. And we take this visual experience as the truth of all the data that's within it. So bridging that gap requires this context. And so if you think back to the story I just told about the hospitals in Liberia, as I alluded to, if you imagine you're in your home and you have an emergency, you probably know how far away the nearest hospital is, how long it'll take you to get there. Do you have to take a back road if there's traffic? Do you already know which hospital you would go to for which type of issue? Do you even have choices? And so I asked, because when I tell you that Liberia, the nearest hospital was 100 miles away, you probably already had a context regarding your assumptions if that's safe enough for you to drive to or not. If that's, if that equates to access in your opinion, right? Like we all have a context or a framework with how we interpret information and data. So Katie McCurdy of Pictal Health and takes this whole idea of patient stories to a whole nother level too. And so she says, I've noticed that there's a holy grail mentality when it comes to interoperability and aggregation, a sense that if we could only bring all the data together in one place, we'd finally have a complete picture of a person and be able to diagnose and treat them more effectively. I can say with confidence that data aggregation alone cannot produce a person's whole health story. Now, I recognize a lot of the work that we're doing is not at an individual patient level. Some of it may be, but a lot of it is aggregating the information up. Unfortunately, when we do that all the time, we do miss kind of these other layers of information and how individual patient data can relate and actually inform our data analysis. So for example, if folks don't know of Katie McCurdy, she does some pretty cool work with individual patients to help visualize their patient journey, both diagnoses, life events, treatments that they've had. And when all of this is visualized in a way that she very uniquely does, patterns start to emerge and people are able to really understand how different events or things in their life are contributing to their symptoms, to their diagnoses, and treatments, etc. Now, again, we may not be able to do this all the time with every patient or with every data point that we have, but giving some thought to how all the different layers of data as it relates to one person can be really informative, at least if we take a moment to pause and think about the people behind the data. So another visualization that I had done, I think back in January, was on pregnancies in prisons. Now, when I say pregnancies in prisons, people may immediately have some kinds of thoughts about that, you know, about the people that are in prison, about the mothers, about why they're in prison, should they be able to give birth, should they be able to keep their kids, should they not be able to keep their kids, all these different things that we all have perhaps personal opinions on. What I had wanted to do with this, I had found some data on births in prison, but I wanted to kind of disaggregate that to figure out a little more about this story. So I took one data point that I found about one woman's experience and what happened to her when she had to give birth while in prison. And by starting at this level, gave me so much more perspective once I got to the aggregate. So here, I started thinking about this one individual, and she gave birth alone in her cell. She didn't have any perinatal care. She didn't have a sterile environment. People did not come to her aid when she was needing it for whatever reason. And I come to find out a lot of issues that were surrounding you know, giving birth in prison and the care that women get. And as well as the types of birth that they have. But all this funnels down. So I started at the most granular level and funneled it down into the most aggregate, which is sort of backwards that a lot of us do in our perhaps work visualizations. I know for me, I tend to start at an aggregate and then we funnel down to the patient details if you want, right? Like that's typical how analytic framework will work on some, you know, drill down capacities. But by doing this backwards, I was able to get some perspective on an actual person and feel some emotional connection to this and understand, want to understand, ask questions about what that experience might be like and what might have prevented it. And, you know, why did she have to give birth in her cell? And why couldn't she have, you know, kept her child afterward? Things of that nature. And then I come to find out that things such as prison nurseries, there's actually very few of them in the United States. And, you know, if you're not lucky, if you are unfortunate to be in jail and then you're pregnant as a woman, if you're not in one of these particular prisons that have a prison nursery, your child is given either to some other family member or put perhaps into you know, foster care for the interim until you're able to care for the baby after discharge. So there was all this other story about within the data that I wouldn't have asked if I hadn't started at the, you know, individual person patient level. And so why now? Why are stories and their context so important now in data visualization? Well, because it's our job to ensure the data is accurate, insightful, meaningful, persuasive, and actionable. And obviously now in the current climate, you know, social issues and personal responsibility and all these aspects of stories of people are very prevalent, right? So we don't want to miss that information, not pay attention to it. So we don't want to just be human-centered, which is why we want to be humanity-centered, right? In our data analysis, we want to think about, as best we can, all people, and using our skills to look at this information from a very large perspective, or if we don't have that, to gain some of those other perspectives so that we can analyze this information. So moving into how do we design ethically, now that we talked a bit about storytelling and understanding people and understanding individual stories, we want to now use that information to design our visualizations in an ethical manner. So the first thing is to know that you're always reflected in the analysis, which means when you're looking at this information, you're coming with your own biases, assumptions about the information that you are tasked with analyzing. And so it's really important to be aware of what those biases are and your assumptions within them, because it will eventually or ultimately drive to some degree your analysis and your presentation of the information. So for example, in this visualization, how you come, your perspective on the moral intersections of a woman in prison will determine or would determine how you visualize this information or thought through this story. Now for me, as someone who worked in the behavioral health field, and I worked with mothers who had been in prison and kids who had been born in prison, I had a respect for the individual, which was felt throughout my storytelling of this visualization, because I was focusing on the mother, and I thought the respect that they still deserve, regardless of why they were in prison, to have a healthy and happy birth, which is ultimately going to improve their outcomes for their child's mental health and theirs in the future. But not everyone may have had that, right? So someone else may have come with a perspective about prison or people in prison and had a different, therefore, story and analysis. But being very aware of your own moral intersections is key to analyzing healthcare data and how you end up visualizing it. It's all just about awareness of you know, your own moral capacities. And so there's also a number of other ethical intersections, which I'm not going to totally get into right now, but ultimately understanding all of these pieces, accountability, integrity, etc., and how that you end up determining and being respectful for the individual or for these data points that, as we talked about, are people. Okay, so moving into then how do we share meaning in our data? So how do we take care, right? How do we care for these people in this data, even if, you know, we're never going to know them, right? We're knowing their data very personally often. So the first is ethos, and ethos is it depends on credibility and expertise as a persuasive technique. And I'll go through all these in a little more detail with examples in a second. So just remember, this is about being credible and persuasive. Then there's pathos, which is using our emotion to convey and convince an audience. And lastly is logos, which is appealing to logic and using facts. And all three of these, I think, are really important in healthcare data for the following reasons. Here's some following examples. Okay. So all three of these really help drive visualization to being both persuasive, impactful, engaging, right, analytical. We want all of these in our healthcare data. So here's an example of one that's often driven by ethos, very credible organization, the World Health Organization. So they put out data visualization. We're likely driven by their credibility to interpret this information and understand it and, obviously be persuaded by it. Here's an example of more the pathos side. Very emotional aspect. We have pictures of people. This is about homelessness by David Borkus. And even some of this, the dark background, this is appealing to our emotional side. We may feel an emotional connection, question about the homeless population and this data, and therefore being persuaded by it. And lastly is pathos, which is about logic and facts. And so this is the CDC reported cases of Lyme disease. Here are just data points, dots within each county residents for confirmed cases, very logical fashion. We have all the points. We can clearly see without question where Lyme disease cases are in the United States. And so it appeals to our logic to say, yep, Northeast, we got a lot of Lyme disease. All right. And so again, persuaded very easily by logic. So that's all to say, you want to use both, we talk now, person-centered storytelling. We want to analyze our ethical understanding and assumptions and biases. And then we want to design with both credibility, emotional perspective, and logic to help, again, balance out this healthcare information. So here's a quote saying, any team with performance targets will try to maneuver user behavior to reach company goals. This means we can't simply pledge to never practice persuasion. We have to quite design altogether. Instead, we have to dive in with intent, acknowledging our responsibilities and choosing how to address the ethical challenges. This is a picture from Katie McCurdy again, where a picture is priceless. So we're using, obviously, data visualization to inform decisions likely. And so here's an example of just when you start to visualizing this as a person's like sleep-wake cycle, and then when they had to take medications. And so when a doctor says you have to take medications every 3 hours, and then you actually show somebody like how challenging that is, and you might be able to say, yeah, it's no big deal, you just have to wake up and take it. And then you plot it throughout a day, and you question how really well would you do doing this, right? So now we're looking at a patient and seeing, well, they can't leave their house, they can't get sound sleep, they can't do things because they're tied to their medication. So visualizing even a patient or one person can definitely help you then consider that to a larger population. Okay, the last couple things I'll talk about is then designing for respect, transparency, and designing mindfully. So designing for respect is taking into account human rights, human effort, and human experience. So human rights is your visualization respects and protects civil liberties, reduces inequality, benefits democracy, essentially is respecting, right, people. We're using data visualization to help improve something within the healthcare system. We want to design for human effort, that it's functional, convenient, reliable, and that the visualization, can be used easily by, your consumer, and it's not arrogant or demanding. It understands different people's abilities to interpret information. And lastly is the human experience. We want to design so that it respects a human experience, that this interaction with your visualization can be beautiful, magical, and delightful, right? We want people to take this information, obviously, and use it that we spent time trying to convey people, individual data points, into something useful. So that is the respect. Transparency, as we've kind of talked about a bit, is being very transparent with what you know and don't know. What are your biases and assumptions, and do you share them? Like, do you raise your hand and say, I have my own assumption about this information. I have a bias here. I think we need to, I need to share that, or we need to talk to other people or whatever, or do you not share it? Quickly, I'd done a visualization on prostate cancer, and I had the pleasure of speaking to someone who had directly experienced this. And so I personally don't know anything about prostate cancer, not just because I'm a woman, but because I don't have any personal people that I've been able to talk to about this. My original thought with creating this visualization was actually looking at some of the side effects of prostate cancer. And I had originally gone down kind of this dichotomy between art and real life, and perfection and not perfection, and all these other very interesting concepts. But I ended up speaking to somebody and getting her perspective, and it was very level setting to understand things that I didn't know about prostate cancer, how it's really a disease that a couple shares together because of some of the side effects, such as erectile dysfunction, and that wives are just as impacted as, or not just as, but are impacted along with their spouse. And so there's this relationship complication with prostate cancer and the outcomes that come after having surgeries. So without consulting somebody else on this visualization, I think there was opportunity that I could have misstepped or hurt somebody, or, someone might have been taken what I was trying to do as something good in an incorrect or wrong way that I was not intending. So we always want to talk to the experts and get feedback from people who are different than us, that have a different perspective, or different biases and assumptions, to make sure that we're really doing all our checks and balances on how our visualization is going to be perceived. So I then shifted kind of my visualization to more about these treatment options and different information that could help men have this information and understand the side effects and both treatment options to make some decisions upon, what they would do with prostate cancer. All right, and just to wrap up, some final thoughts is to visualize mindfully, right? So think about who your dashboard is for. What is the project about? Can you create a positive impact? And, how do you feel when you're engaging with that information? Does it make you feel good? Are you feeling bad? Do you feel good about the work that you're doing? And right, you want to just be mindful about all these things to make sure, as we do in healthcare, we're doing no harm, and we should still do that with our visualizations as we're designing both for the people that are within the data and in an ethical way. And so just final takeaways, summaries. Remember, most data ties back to people, and we want to take care of those people. Use the best ethical frameworks that you can. Talk to those experts if you don't know what they all are. Be aware of your biases and assumptions, or your organizations. Test out your analyses and your visualizations on people different than you, or with different perspectives than you, to make sure that you're not missing anything really key or important, or that you're conveying something in a way you don't intend. Build in speed bumps, which essentially means make sure you have the time and the space to correct course, and that you're doing these things in a way that you're not at the end and you need to go back and fix things that you haven't already thought about, different areas that you might need to test out. And lastly, reduce optimism about creations, which means, be willing to, pivot and change what you're doing, and think critically about yourself and visualizations and the people, again, that we're visualizing data on. And with that, I am done with my first run of that presentation ever. So I appreciate everyone's
Lindsay, that if you didn't tell us that that was your first run, I don't think anyone would have noticed. That was a really well done, and I thought a really cool. Cool is not even the right word for it. I think a very appropriate presentation for this group, and all of the different topics that a lot of us end up presenting on. I think the kind of lens that you put on that is going to be something that I'll probably be looking back at once this recording's up and live for you.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Lindsay, I couldn't agree more. That was fantastic. I even pulled out a quote you said that I really just kind of hit home with me. Each data point is a story and worth exploring. There's definitely some truth to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to say, as a behavioral health clinician too, I also recognize and should point out that this is tough work. So I commend everyone in healthcare, because sometimes you're faced with the stories of people that can be very, troubling, or they can impact you personally, or maybe it brings up something in your own past or family or history or what have you. And so it's definitely can be tough. Even with, William's presentation, just thinking about the women who have experienced fistulas and how horrible that might be, but how wonderful it is that there's organizations like his that are working to help these people. But yeah, so I mean, just big kudos to everyone working in this space, and recognizing that when you drill into individual people, sometimes it can be pretty emotional. So hopefully folks have supports built in, or if you don't, hopefully your organization has supports if you ever need, to talk to people about, what you're seeing in your data. But I think it's very powerful when you start realizing and taking care of these data points.
So Mark, do you want to wrap things up? I've got to jump off here.
Yeah, we can wrap up. It looks like there was one question that came in, but I think it's relevant for William actually around your tool. But it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So I think we can wrap up today. There will be a recording available hopefully in the next week or so that'll be posted on our Health Tug user group page on the new Tableau community website. So that will be available shortly for anyone that wants to jump back into either of these two presentations. They will be available there. But otherwise, we'll wrap up. Hopefully everyone then can take advantage of an extra 10 minutes in their day. And again, thank you to William, and thanks, Lindsay, for bringing that together for us today. I thought these were two really, really amazing presentations. So again, thank you to both of you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, William.
Yeah, thanks
everybody for tuning in.
All right, I will close this out and
all right.